If you've never heard of the video game Shaq Fu, count yourself extremely lucky. It's a fighting game on the Super Nintendo starring Shaquille O'Neal, and it routinely appears on worst games of all time lists due to its abysmal controls making it nigh impossible to pull off special moves, as well as bullshit hit detection. There's a website dedicated to destroying all known copies of Shaq Fu in existence. There's a game console called the Retron 5 that plays games from 10 or so classic systems, and it's rigged to bring up a screen warning you to play a different game if it detects you trying to play Shaq Fu. I've never played Shaq Fu, and I don't really plan to, because I just don't have a system that plays Super Nintendo games. And to pacify my disappointed viewers, here's a copy of Mortal Kombat Mythology Sub-Zero that I now own for you people. Anyway, in March 2014, indie game studio Big D's Productions began crowdfunding a beat-em-up sequel to Shaq Fu with Shaquille O'Neal's endorsement and support. After several delays that Wikipedia pins on vague licensing issues, Shaq Fu: A Legend Reborn was released on basically every major console. I bought it on the Nintendo Switch because I find myself using the Switch's tremendously convenient portable functions all the time. So a genre-switching sequel to one of the worst games ever made, how does it hold up? Well, it kicks ass! I mean, it's not revolutionary or anything, but it's a very well-designed specimen of its genre, and I had a damn good time playing it. First things first, you've got to love a game that has its own theme song.
I'm back and about to storm. Shaq Fu, a legend reborn. My story is convoluted and full of holes, so pay attention.
In this universe, Shaq is a Chinese rickshaw driver trained in martial arts by his mentor Yi Yi. Why is Shaq Chinese? Well, partly to troll real-life Shaq for a joke he made about Yao Ming, partly to joke about how Shaq is both the only tall person and the only black person in all of China, but primarily to make a lot of jokes about Chinese stereotypes.
I'm a poor Chinese rickshaw driver from a town called Hung Lo. Sounds like a damn cat screaming from the kitchen of my favorite restaurant. They destroyed the factory where I toiled as a toddler.
Anyway, Shaq is called into action when the Chinese death god Yen Lo Wang invades the Earth. To aid his invasion, Yen Lo Wang has sent demons to Earth disguised as celebrities to make the human race collectively more stupid and easier to conquer. So you travel to exotic locations fighting stand-ins for infamous celebrities, leading to a final showdown with Yen Lo Wang. The funny thing is, most of the celebrity bosses are pretty easy to pick out. The first boss is Chris Brown, Babyface is obviously Justin Bieber, Diamond is obviously Paris Hilton, Candy is Kim Kardashian, and Benedict Fender is Mel Gibson, but it took me forever and a half to figure out who the second boss was supposed to be.
You gotta love this place.
I knew he was a puppet. But why'd you choose the body of a bloated Oompa Loompa?
The engineers forgot to fit this thing with an anus. It's now a giant crab sack filled with 8 decades of excrement.
Still drawing a blank. While the song that plays over the end credits goes through the bosses, maybe it'll give me some more clues.
Next to emerge from the demon lair, a short-fingered chump with comb-over hair. We fired his ass.
Oh! Now, it's easy to write off the game as just having you punch out the most obnoxious targets imaginable for cheap laughs, since the entire game is so tongue-in-cheek that the tongue has punched through the side of its mouth, but the game does have a deeper theme behind this premise. Celebrities are inherently looked up to as role models and inspirations for everyday people, and society doesn't always elevate the right people to such a station. The real-life counterparts to the game's villains stand for racism, rampant narcissism, vanity, total disregard for the people around you, exploiting others to get what you want, all horrible traits that are reinforced in society when they're demonstrated by the rich and powerful. Shaquille O'Neal, by comparison, yeah, he's not as famous as the villains in the game, and he's put his name on a lot of crap. Outside of basketball, he's best known for making 2 of the worst movies ever made. But no matter the lack of sheen on Shaq's star power, he's tried to use his status as a celebrity to be a role model. He's at least tried to use his fame to make the world a better place, as people in positions of influence should.
Oh man, my favorite child actress. It breaks my heart to see someone so talented fall so far.
Especially today, as it seems every week a major celebrity has a massive scandal come to light, it's important to elevate good role models, to judge the famous on their character and their person instead of their fame or their products. Or maybe it's just wish fulfillment fantasy where you punch asshole celebrities in the face like you've always wanted to, and I'm ascribing my own values to the game because having a YouTube channel gives me an unwarranted air of authority. Who knows? Shaq Fu: A Legend Reborn is an arcade-style side-scrolling beat-em-up. It's very much in the same vein as the old Ninja Turtles games on the NES and SNES, aside from that first abomination that shall never be mentioned. You have a button you mash for basic attacks, a button you hit for size 22 attacks where a massive Monty Python foot whips out if you're in the middle of a combo, the Shaq Wave, where Shaq punches the ground and creates a huge shock wave that recharges as you punch things, a dodge roll, and the Shaq Slam, where you dash forward and knock down enemies but has a cooldown, and I kept forgetting that I had it. My only problem with the combat is that you can't attack up or down. Your attacks and jumps only move to the left or right, another thing cribbed from old arcade games. You get used to it pretty quickly, but it adds a weird stiffness to the otherwise excellent controls. Beyond that, it's easy to pick up and really smooth to play, and the action moves at a great pace, quick enough to keep the blood pumping and the action satisfying, but slow enough that you can always easily tell what's going on. Shaq Fu gets right the one thing that most beat-em-up games I've played get wrong. It has a lot of variety. The game is constantly throwing new enemies at you that require new methods and strategies to fight. The first level alone has 5 different enemy types: normal goons, goons with shields that have to be smashed with the size 22, projectile-spewing enemies, athletic enemies with a long reach, and ninjas that teleport around the stage but can only hurt you if they hit you from behind. And most of the levels past that pile on 4 or so additional enemy types per stage: flying assholes that shoot fireballs, hype girls that spawn more enemies, huge enemies that require carefully timed counters, zombies that keep you from jumping, rent-a-cops that counter your kicks, and every new mechanic feels well balanced and manageable. On top of that, the arenas throw in a lot of variety with bludgeoning weapons that you're meant to use, barrels that you throw like bowling balls, environmental elements like a crane to knock down enemies, and stage hazards like cars or motorcycle goons. Whether it's a gimmick with the stage, a new enemy type to adapt to, or a challenging new combination of enemies, the game is almost always throwing something new at you. You get infinite lives and regular checkpoints, and the challenge of the game is derived from having to fight and strategize your way out of each unique encounter and mix of mechanics. Contrast with most other arcade-style beat-em-ups that just throw the same damn enemy at you in massive droves, and all the challenge comes from the game being an endurance test. Even beat-em-up games that I like, such as Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles on the GameCube, Revenge of the Sith on handhelds, and, stretching the definition of like, Batman Rise of Sin Tzu, as enjoyable as they are, they get boring if you play them too much in one sitting because there's never enough meaningful variation in the enemies. I said back in my Star Wars Game Boy Advance review that repetitive enemies in combat are par for the course with beat-em-ups, and I am now forced to retract that statement. Shaq Fu never got to feeling stale to me as it keeps throwing in new challenges and new combos of enemies and hazards. The second half especially grows some real teeth and provides some meaty challenges as enemies get tougher and tougher. I was genuinely engaged with the game all the way through the final boss, and engaged enough to play through a second time to get game footage. Another fun and welcome dose of variety comes from the sections where Shaq transforms. There are 3 sections where you don the Shaq Diesel armor, which I did not realize is a reference to one of his rap albums. The suit gives you a machine gun punch and a ground pound you have to trigger repeatedly to avoid overheating. These sections basically put you into God mode, but damn are they fun! I was going to say that putting Shaq in a power armor metal suit has a history of not ending well, but let's be honest, nobody bought that his costume in steel was made of metal. The other alternate form you get is the Shaqtus, which I thought was a really bad pun until I found out it's based on one of Shaq's basketball nicknames. So it was someone else's bad pun. This turns Shaq into a giant cactus that fires projectiles instead of punching. You would think this would make the game easier, but the Shaqtus also cuts your health in half, so these segments require careful maneuvering and strategy around enemies, and actually make for good challenges and some great variety while still being fun. I am Shoot! As fun as the gameplay is, and I found it to be really fun, it's only half the experience. The game's other major strength is its sense of humor. The entire plot is played for laughs with just enough gravitas to hold the game together, and it leads to a very lighthearted and fun adventure atmosphere. The first level is a riot with some hilarious interplay between Shaq and Yi-Yi, so it kinda sucks that Yi-Yi dies after the first level. Oh, don't bitch about spoilers, he's the old mentor character. He dies in the trailer, for crying out loud. It'd be a spoiler if he were alive at the game's end. The game makes a few running jokes about product placement. In real life, Shaq did a lot of ads for Icy Hot, so Icy Hot packs are the game's instant restore to full health items, and the game periodically breaks the fourth wall in humorous ways, either pointing out video game tropes or poking fun at Shaq's real-life ventures.
Seriously? People crowdfunded this crap? You should have remade Steel.
Steel is next, baby.
You know, with the current state of the DCEU, there are worse ideas than a remake of Steel. Like that solo Joker movie with Jared Leto that is actually in development for some incomprehensible reason. The game doesn't even try to hide that it's blatant wish fulfillment fantasy, with many of the enemies being caricatures of the most punchable people in society. The Los Angeles levels have you punch out an endless succession of lawyers, gym bros, and wannabe punk rockers, and Babyface's level pits you against drug dealers and annoying tween fans that yell YOLO on an endless loop. Although, come to think of it, if Babyface is supposed to be Justin Bieber, shouldn't the enemies be squealing fangirls? And then the 5th level sends you to some kind of island retreat for racists where you punch the ever-loving hell out of neo-Nazi skinheads and KKK members. Now that was fun. How'd they get away with using the KKK? Well, let's just look at the Shakopedia, the game's in-game reference section that has funny descriptions for the items and characters. There once was a xenophobe fool from the shallower end of the pool. The manager said, turn his white hood to red, and we settled with this floating tool. With all the fun the game pokes at itself, it's just fun to be in this world, and Shaq is a very affable and fun protagonist with a ton of great lines.
You're supposed to be dead!
Then we've got something in common.
For all my praise, I will say that the game is far from perfect. I didn't encounter any major bugs my first playthrough, but the second time through I had an enemy that either spawned or got stuck off screen and forced me to reload a checkpoint. The game's videos don't play correctly if you load them from the extras menu, but I'm guessing they'll patch that pretty quickly.
He was a puppet.
The one combat mechanic that feels like bullshit is when enemies stun you. One of the enemies from Racist Island, and not Paris Hilton, have the ability to stun you so all the other enemies get free shots on you. To get free, you have to move the control stick left and right repeatedly, but the indicator is hard to see. It fails for a full second or so if you move the stick the wrong way, and because you were likely moving when you got stunned without warning, you're likely to fail the QTE and stay stunned until you wrestle the controls correctly to get it started. Also, as much as I like the final exam setup of the last level where most of the game's prior enemies return in new challenging combos, it would have been nice if they introduced at least one new enemy for the final level. Also, the floor constantly catching fire gimmick in the last level leads to some cheap deaths since it's kind of hard to spot. The biggest problem with Shaq Fu is that even for a $40 indie budget title, the game is still pretty short. A single playthrough clocks in around 3 hours, plus however many times you die. There is a free DLC level coming where you fight Kanye West, or at least it's free for certain copies, but that's still not going to get it to the 4-hour threshold that even EA uses as the bare minimum for games these days. There's also no replay value unless you want to try a higher difficulty setting, but none of these issues come remotely close to deal breakers, and with a reduced price indie title, a certain lack of polish is to be expected. The game delivers where it counts, with fun combat wrapped in an entertaining atmosphere. Shaq Fu: A Legend Reborn was just a big ball of fun, well-designed combat wrapped in a comedic atmosphere and with a good heart at its core. How much you enjoy it will really depend on how much you like arcade beat-em-ups as a genre, whether you think the game's combat looks varied enough to stay fresh for you, and whether you can forgive the game's short runtime. I, for one, had a blast playing it, and I highly recommend giving it a try. This is one legend that deserves to live on.